Hi, everybody. For my final project, I decided to research the rise of the moral majority as a political force. As a high school history teacher, I often get to teach this topic, but never really get the chance to delve into it in great detail. The moral majority rose out of the shadow of the Nixon presidency to be the voice of conservative Christians in America, which culminated with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. Jerry Falwell grew up in the shadow of the Great Depression. His childhood experiences with the economic downturns of the 1930s would inspire him to craft the church as an instrument to help people in need. By the 1950s, he was a married man and he had his own television show, and he was one of the only people to be able to do that in the South, to use television as a medium to reach Christians. By 1971, he had added a Christian school, a college, several social outreach programs. He planted the seeds of the moral majority when he started holding his I Love America rallies in 1976. He was trying to combat what he saw as the moral decay of America. Most people in his position would never mix religion and politics, but Reverend Falwell felt that the need was so great that he could not remain silent on these issues. He was able to mix faith, patriotism, and conservative politics in a way that attracted both religious Christians and non-religious Christians. In the shadow of the Vietnam War, his message resonated with Americans. By 1971, other major conservative Christians were reaching out to him and asking him to form the moral majority. In fact, the phrase moral majority was coined by Paul Wainwright, and this is what historians refer to as the beginning of the rise of the religious right in America. The issues that were important to Reverend Falwell were intelligent design and school prayer. Now, these are not new topics to us. Some of us discussed this when we researched the Scopes Monkey trial. The idea of ministers being involved in reform go all the way back to 1863, when several ministers tried to get Congress to pass an amendment labeling America as a Christian nation. In the post-War of 1812 period called the Era of Good Feelings, we had the Second Great Awakening, which we studied in our readings. And we see at that time the rise of the women's Christian temperance movement and the abolitionist movement. In both cases, we see Christians trying to improve themselves and the society around them. By the time we get to Nixon in 1969, we have a country in the moral decay that Reverend Falwell was witnessing. Some of that comes out of the Vietnam War and the response to it by the hippies. Some of it is the Johnson administration overtaxing and pushing social programs on communities. Reverend Falwell saw this as an opportunity to get the government to bring the taxes down, and he himself felt that his church could do a better job of bringing help to people in his community than he felt the government could. He thought his local church was a better social program. Nixon was holding prayer meetings in the White House as a way of attracting Christians to get their votes. Nixon falls from grace with his obstruction of justice and his resignation of the presidency in 1974, but the die had been cast. Christian voters, specifically conservative Christian voters, saw this as an opportunity out of the shadows of Nixon to become a voting bloc. In 1976, there were two candidates for the presidency, Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was an evangelical Christian, but Reverend Falwell chose to back Ford, the Republican, because even though he may have had some alignment with Carter, Reverend Falwell had become much more conservative and had broken with his fellow Southerners who traditionally had voted Democrat. By the 1980 election, it was becoming apparent that Reverend Falwell was the representative of conservative Protestants in an area we refer to as the Bible Belt. There were concerns among conservative suburbanites about the effects of television, the effects of pornography in magazines, and news reports about gay rights. To the demographics of Jerry Falwell's area, meaning the South, he and the moral majority sounded like the bulwark against this unwelcome challenge. The interesting thing I found in my research is it was not exclusively a regional thing. By 1980, Reverend Falwell was the voice of conservatives in many parts of the United States, not just in the Bible Belt South. Ronald Reagan's anti-government rhetoric won him the support of the moral majority for the 1980 political election. Reagan furthered his support for the moral majority by Liberty Baptist College and espousing that prayer in school was the way to battle how liberals had forced the expulsion of God from the classroom. Reagan then doubled down on this when he spoke in Dallas at the Religious Roundtable's National Affairs briefing. Reagan complained about federally funded textbooks had taught grade school children about relativism, somewhat akin to what we studied with the Scopes trial. Reagan was using some of Jerry Falwell's actual language when he gave this address, and so it was clear to the people listening that Reagan was aligning himself with Falwell, and Falwell was already aligning himself with Ronald Reagan. This will eventually culminate with Reagan's election and becoming president in 1981. The interesting thing about Reagan becoming president in 1981 is while he did have the voting of the religious right, he doesn't really use that political capital to put many of the things into play that he spoke about. By 1989, Jerry Falwell had concluded that the moral majority had reached its goals and that he was disbanding the organization.